Put it right in the camera.
February 17th to order. You can have a call of the roll. Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Barnstable, Royden Richardson.
Present.
Warren, Michael Blanton. I am present. Brewster, Elizabeth Taylor.
Present.
Chatham, Lynn Leffner. Dennis, Richard Roy. Eastham, Joy Brookshire.
Present.
Falmouth, Lario Di Gregorio. Harwich, Robert Bradley.
Here.
Mashpee, Ernest Virgilio. Orleans, Peter Munger. Provincetown, Austin Knight.
Present.
Sandwich, Joanne O'Keefe. Truro, Peter Graham.
Here.
Wellfleet, Roger Putnam.
Here.
Yarmouth, John McCormick Jr. County Commissioner, Mary Pat Flynn.
Present.
Minority Representative, John Harris. Native American Representative, Mark Harding. And Governor's appointee, Herb Olson.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, we have a quorum.
We are now open for public comment on any matter that is not on the agenda. You come up and speak at the microphone. You're welcome. Seeing none, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, the Executive Director's report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be brief. I know we've got a lot of public testimony today. I just want to bring to the Commission members' attention. As you might recall, last year at this time we had an engagement with NSTAR regarding spraying of herbicides on rights of way. They agreed to a one-year moratorium last year to allow Cape Cod Commission staff the time to map private public drinking water supplies in those rights of way so that their yearly operating plans that they work on with the town clearly identify and delineate those drinking water supplies. So that work is primarily done. So we're in discussions with NSTAR right now to pass that information over to them to be incorporated in their yearly operating plan procedure going forward. Additionally, we are in discussions with NSTAR and the Department of Agricultural Resources about a monitoring program that will give us some baseline information about the status of herbicides and pesticides in drinking water. So there'll be more to report back on that. I just want to remind everybody, in case they're not clear, that the Commission has no authority currently to ban herbicides and pesticides, and that this has been an agreed upon situation between the Cape Cod Commission and NSTAR. So we've been working for the last 12 months cooperatively, and we hope to have more definitive plan to report on within a short period of time, hopefully within 30 days.
Thank you. Approve the minutes for the meeting of December 16th. Could we have a motion to approve as received? So moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Any comments? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions?
Abstain.
Abstention. If I could have a motion to we'll take the vote all in favor. Yeah, we did. Have a motion to approve the minutes of January 6, 2011.
So moved. Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstention? And a motion to approve the minutes of the Cape Cod Commission of January 20th, 2011. So moved. Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? Any abstention? Now we're going to enter the public hearing phase of the 2009 Regional Policy Plan Proposed Amendment to Energy Section. And this is continued from the February 3rd, 2011 Commission. And Ryan Christenberry will present this matter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, Ryan Christenberry, I'm the planner with the Cape Cod Commission. Since the January 20th Cape Cod Commission meeting, at which time the proposed threshold and standards were remanded back to the Joint Planning and Regulatory Committee for additional review, that joint committee has met on 2 occasions for public meetings, one on January 31st and a second meeting on February 14th. Before you today are the proposed revisions to the DRI review threshold and standards presented in a track changes format so that you can clearly see the language as it was originally proposed on January 20th and exactly how it's been revised. I'd like to offer just a summary of those proposed substantive revisions for you. The first includes removal of the meteorological or MET tower from the DRI review threshold. The second constitutes a revised approach to the noise setback. This revised approach would entail a 10 times the rotor diameter setback for turbines greater than 660 kW in rated power capacity rather than the 3,000 foot setback. Projects subject to this setback would be required to perform a noise study and fund a Cape Cod Commission-approved consultant's review of that noise study. Depending upon the noise study, projects may be eligible for a reduced setback at the Commission's discretion. The third revision is the inclusion of MET tower removal in the decommissioning plan as required by the decommissioning standard. A fourth revision is an increase in the waiver for municipal turbines from 100 kW to 250 kW, allowing for greater power capacity for municipal projects. And then the removal of roads and public recreation areas from the clear area definition was a fifth revision. And finally, some clarification to the definition of a receptor. Aspects of the proposed threshold and standard that remain unchanged are the 65-foot height trigger for DRI review. This is based on an average regional tree canopy of 40 feet plus a 25-foot blade swept area to allow for smaller residential scale turbines. It's worth noting that the DRI review threshold for monopole cell towers is 80 feet and was derived in part based on consideration for structures that appear above the average tree height of the regional, or the average height of the regional tree canopy. And lastly, the standard that requires shadow flicker effects on receptors to be mitigated to less than 10 hours per year is substantively unchanged, although there are some revisions to the language to provide some clarity. If commissioners have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Again, I will ask about the proposed threshold, the very first one about the height, and you said that you would be coming up with a definition for residential turbines, which would allow leeway for towns to permit residential turbines, but when are we going to see that definition?
It was my understanding that we would take that, if we were to take that approach, we would come up with a residential definition at a later date. The committee didn't discuss it in its deliberations on Monday. I think the residential definition requires some thought and some investigation about how to craft that. We do have a suggestion for modification to the threshold, which I think Jessica Wilgus could walk you through if you'd like to hear that.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. For the record, my name is Jessica Wilgus, and I'm Commission Counsel. One approach that was discussed was the possibility of towns having their own certified bylaw through the Commission, in which case, after they had done this, there would be the ability for the threshold to be raised in those instances. So the proposal that I have that's being distributed in the room now would keep the language as it's written, and at the conclusion of the language, it would read, I can read it to you in entirety. It would right now capture construction of any land-based wind energy conversion facilities greater than 65 feet in height, measured from the natural grade of the site to the blade tip at its highest point, but then it would be modified by unless the Assembly of Delegates adopts an ordinance establishing a procedure for the Cape Cod Commission to certify a municipality's wind bylaw, and that such bylaw is certified under the ordinance. The language says then those turbines essentially within that town are not required to be referred unless it's a discretionary referral. So technically what would happen is it would exist at 65 feet in height unless and until that town came forward with a certified bylaw that was certified by the commission. And in those cases, the threshold could be lifted.
Does that mean that if a town has a certified bylaw, nothing comes to you?
That would be open for how it's presented would be something that we would have to coordinate and present to the Assembly, and I think that's something we certainly would want to collaborate upon. It's not something that we would come top down on.
So this will have to wait for the Assembly to adopt an ordinance. So what happens in between? Unless the Assembly is going to act like immediately.
Well, we expect these standards to be in front of the Assembly if they're voted today in March. And there are several things that are going to happen if the standards are adopted. One is that there will be a technical advisory committee, a citizens advisory committee to the technical bulletin process that will engage in the discussion of the technical bulletin. So that will go forward. The other thing that will happen is we will begin to take a look at our model bylaw. So there'll be a process associated with that. And I think in conjunction with that, there would be the development of an additional ordinance to go to the Assembly that would allow local towns with a certified local wind bylaw to to modify that 65-foot threshold. But there would be a maximum amount on that. I would anticipate that it would probably be no more than up to 150 feet. I think there's been a lot of discussion about 65 feet, a lot of opposition to it. But we have to understand when we're looking at adding a new minimum performance standard to the regional policy plan, we have to view that in the context of every other minimum performance standard that we have out there. That's why the 65-foot is really most related in its initial trigger to the 80-foot cell tower issue, with the cell towers being monopoles and the wind turbines having more horizontal presence as well as a vertical presence, which gets them down to 65 feet. But your concern, Elizabeth, has always been that we would catch some of the taller residential turbines, which is what we don't want to do. So with this proposed ordinance going forward to the Assembly, or with a definition of residential wind that would probably be adopted as part of the technical bulletin, I think we can get beyond that problem. But in reality, I don't think there's not a big difference in the number and the kind of wind turbines we would catch between 65 and 150 feet. It's going to be the same. And in particular, there is one structure that was put up on the Cape pursuant to a local wind bylaw. I believe the wind turbine in question was about 100 feet tall. And it's the only one on the Cape today that's actually thrown a blade and is still up and hasn't been functional in quite some time. So that is a problematic item. So we want to be cognizant of some of the issues surrounding quality control on some of the smaller turbines as well as
It sort of speaks to what Dan Fortier said in his memo about smaller wind turbines. Thank you.
Dan's a smart man.
Any other questions from members of the commission? Are there any comments from federal, state, or local officials? If you have comments, you can just walk right over to the lectern.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Wayne Bircher. I'm a selectman in the town of Dennis. I'd like to begin by urging you to adopt some DRI regulations of some description. To not do so leaves us at the mercy of the state in terms of what they would like to do, and nobody wants to be in that position. So we need to have some regulations. Having said that, once the DRI regulations are adopted, I hope that you will create some exemptions as you look, as opposed to waivers. Because waivers means that we have to come back and go through a presentation process, and exemption means we're exempted and we can move on. So it's certainly my hope that you look at that. My final comment has to do with applicants for WECS greater than 660 kilowatts in terms of what they need to do for a noise study if they wish to be exempt from some of the regulations. Within this noise study, there is a request to have some infrasound studies done, and therein lies my concern. I have read many infrasound studies that have been sent to me, like we all have received different information from people. And I have yet to find empirical proof that infrasound definitely causes some of the problems that people are having. It's been theorized, it's a hypothesis, but in terms of the exact cause and effect, we could take 50 people, expose them to a certain level of infrasound, and have 25 affected or 10, and where it can be replicated by other study groups, I have yet to see. Why this is important is because if applicants have to prove that infrasounds will have a minimal impact on surrounding people and structures and so forth, it can't be done because you can't prove it has any impact at all. I know your goal is not to be obstructionists, to try to have responsible wind energy for everybody. But they must be goals that we can certainly meet. And my fear is that if this will not be able to be met under any circumstances, which I would like to say, infrasound may very well be the cause of some of these problems. We just don't know yet for sure. And I do not think that applicants should be held accountable for something that is yet to be empirically established. Thank you.
Any other federal, state, local officials?
Good afternoon. I'm appearing to you today. My name is Liz Argo. I am a consultant with the Cape and Vineyard Electric Cooperative, and today I am here solely to represent a letter that was crafted by the Cape and Vineyard Electric Cooperative. Dear Chairman Richardson, I am writing to express the Cape and Vineyard Electric Cooperative, CVEC's, Executive Committee's opposition to the proposed new mandatory DRI threshold for wind turbines. As presently drafted, the threshold and associated minimum performance standards would require that every wind turbine taller than 65 feet go through the expense, time, and burden of a full Cape Cod Commission review. CVEC believes a mandatory DRI threshold for wind turbines is necessary, and this one is unnecessarily and overly burdensome. The effect of these proposed new regulations will be to serve as a significant roadblock to the installation of additional municipal land-based wind turbines on Cape Cod. While the recent changes adopted by the Planning and Regulatory Subcommittee make the proposed mandatory DRI for wind turbines slightly less draconian, they do nothing to lessen the substantial negative impact that will result if every turbine over 65 feet must go through DRI review. We will now go through each MPS. Proposed threshold. The DRI Enabling Regulations Section 3 states construction of any land-based wind energy conversion facility greater than 65 feet in height, measured from a natural grade to the site to the blade tip at its highest point. We suggest, bullet point number 1, a new DRI threshold, particularly with a height as short as 65 feet, is not justified. Such a short height should not logically or reasonably qualify wind turbine as a, quote, development of regional impact. Bullet point 2, no smaller turbines, those under 200 feet or 660 kilowatt, have been responsible for any of the noise complaints that have served as the impetus for the proposed new DRI threshold. Bullet point number 3, most, if not all, Cape towns already have adequate regulatory framework for siting turbines. Bullet point 4, a new DRI threshold for wind will substantially prolong the permitting process as towns must forego their permitting process while the Cape Cod Commission review proceeds. Bullet point 5, the fee required for DRI application review is a substantial percentage of total budgets for these smaller turbine projects. We would propose an amendment increasing the threshold from 65 feet to 175 feet because increasing the threshold would at least allow smaller residential and commercial turbines of up to 225 kilowatts to be installed without the added burden and cost of Cape Cod Commission review. Proposed minimum performance standard MPS E17, the clear area. Currently, the proposed minimum clear area is 1.5 times the height of the turbine. We find this excessive. While the Planning and Regulatory Subcommittee's removal of, quote, public recreation areas and roads from the clear area definition is most helpful, the 1.5 standard is still excessive and is unjustified by facts. Bourne's wind bylaw calls for a clear area, the height of the turbine plus 10 feet, while Barnstable's requirement is 1.2 times the height of the turbine from residential abutters. There are clearly a number of turbines now operating in Bourne, at the Mass Maritime Academy, at Portsmouth, Rhode Island High School, and at Hull High School that demonstrate the close coexistence of large turbines in occupied buildings is not a problem. We would propose that you decrease the minimum clear area from 1.5 times to 1.2 times the height of the turbine to the blade. Noise. After recent changes, this MPS would now require that all turbines larger than 660 kilowatts have a setback of 10 times the rotor's diameter. That setback would be reduced if the applicant can demonstrate through the noise study to the satisfaction of the Cape Cod Commission that there are minimal impacts to occupants within the reduced setback. Turbines under 660 kilowatts would be required to have setbacks based on their clear area setback, or 1.5 times their height. This would result in a 660 kilowatt turbine being required to have a 293-foot setback, while a 750 kilowatt turbine would need a 1,600-foot setback. We suggest that while proposed revised setbacks are more reasonable, thank you, especially for the smaller turbines, than the previous proposed 3,000-foot setback, they're still more stringent than is justified. There are many large turbines currently in production with sound emission characteristics so low that they pose no threat of annoyance to occupants of buildings located within distances of less than 1,000 feet and even closer in some circumstances. Bullet point number 1, the proposed MPSs and DRI threshold fail to recognize that each turbine, each location, and each project is different and will result in very different sound and noise impacts, even when the same brand and model of turbine is employed. Bullet point 2, a GIS spatial planning exercise has confirmed that a 3,000-foot noise setback requirement would preclude the siting of 1.0 megawatt or larger turbines in the town of Barnstable. An updated GIS study should be performed Cape-wide to demonstrate and determine what impact the new regulations would have on any additional turbine installations on Cape Cod. The inclusion of a noise mitigation plan coupled with the posting of an assured fund offer positive assurance that noise complaints can be readily addressable. Therefore, the proposed amendment is to replace the second sentence of MPS 1E.18 with the following new sentence. Applicants for all wind energy conversion facilities shall demonstrate to the reasonable satisfaction of the Cape Cod Commission that there are no undue adverse impacts to occupants from the nearest receptor or residentially zoned parcel. MPS E1.9, shadow flicker. As it is, all applicants for a wind energy conversion facility shall conduct a study of shadow flicker on receptors, which will be affected by the proposed wind turbine. All DRIs with shadow flicker effects affecting receptors for more than 10 hours per year shall require the applicant to submit a mitigation plan which specifies operational controls, landscaping, or other means that mitigate shadow flicker events to less than 10 hours per year for review and consideration by the Commission. Our comment, the choice of 10 hours per year threshold for shadow flicker is excessive and is far more stringent than the 30-hour standard used for a number of years by design professionals and by a number of European countries. Rapidly developing technology is allowing for shadow flicker on newer turbines to be substantially limited and precisely controlled. So we propose the amendment, replace 10 hours per year should be replaced with 30 hours per year. The decommissioning, currently the MPSE 1.10 states that any wind energy conversion facility that has not been operational for more than 120 consecutive days shall be dismantled and removed from the site by the owner, operator, and other parties as designated by the decommissioning plan. The applicant shall also provide security in a form and amount satisfactory to the Cape Cod Commission, which security shall cover the life of the wind energy conversion facility. The requirement that a wind energy conversion facility be dismantled after only 120 days of operation is overbearing and would make it impossible to obtain financing from lenders. To allow time for parts replacement, rational assessment of the business model, and to seek public input and comply with the open meeting law requirements, the 120-day time period is unworkable for the towns. A downtime of 1 year for a municipal facility is a more appropriate trigger, and the Commission should be allowed to extend this period as necessary for, quote, good cause shown. As to bonding, Bourne's wind bylaw does provide that the planning board may require the posting of a bond or other security to assure satisfactory completion of decommissioning. Other security for a municipal project should include a decommissioning fund built up over time and held on the books of the municipality. The regulation should require the funding of decommissioning over time, allowing the initial cost of the development to be paid down before the decommissioning fund accumulation commences. MPS E1.11, the waiver, municipal waiver, because of the procedural, legal, and political safeguards applicable to town appropriations and the use of town-owned land, minimum performance standards E1.8 through E1.10 shall not apply to one municipal wind energy conversion facility 250 kilowatts or less on a single parcel. While the 250 kilowatt waiver, our comments, is better than the originally proposed 100 kilowatt standard, it's still too restrictive to be of any benefit to the towns. Any truly cost-effective municipal turbine is likely to be larger at like the 250 kilowatt. Also in Barnstable's case, because two 100 kilowatt turbines were recently sited at the water pollution control facility, the town wouldn't have met this standard, even though the parcel is significant in size and more than adequate for the two turbines, even at 250 kilowatts each. Bullet point 2, towns and CVEC, Cape and Vineyard Electric Co-op, should be allowed to site municipal turbines without having to seek Cape Cod Commission review. The proposed amendment is to replace the existing sentence with the following. Minimum performance standards E1.8 through E1.10 shall not apply to municipal wind energy conversion facilities. Proposed changes to the sections of the RPP, adverse visual impacts. The broadness of the language, particularly the leading phrase, new development shall be sited and designed to avoid adverse visual impacts to visually sensitive areas, is an invitation to litigation and gives opponents a virtually unlimited window of opportunity to kill a project on aesthetic grounds, and makes a successful appeal by a municipality seeking responsibly to build a turbine a near impossibility. What does virtually sensitive area mean, and how do you define adverse visual impacts? This requirement, because of its subjective nature, is simply going to invite confusion among prospective developers as well as the public. The truth of the matter is that large-scale turbines will be perceived by many of those in proximity to them as visually unattractive. Turbines are large, and by their nature will be seen from many vantage points. In many cases, you can't just buffer them away or cluster them to limit their visibility. Inclusion of the indicated language simply invites an unhelpful debate about the vagaries of aesthetics. Here, the Commission knows what these projects will look like, and the Commission should decide whether it chooses to support these projects, at least on aesthetic grounds. While it may be appropriate to require municipalities to mitigate visual impacts to the maximum extent feasible, it's unreasonable to leave open for debate and possible denial a project because of perceived aesthetic impact. Conclusion. Cape and Vineyard Electric Cooperative is certainly not opposed to the regulation of wind turbines on Cape Cod. Indeed, for wind energy development to have the best chance of success, it should be properly regulated and sited only in the best locations. But for regulations to be effective, they must be based on the best science available. From ancient times to the present, every form of technological advancement has brought some negatives along with the positives. Wind is no different. Just as we've accepted airplanes in our skies, bridges with high-speed automobile traffic crossing the canal, and our pollution-spewing power plant beside the old Kings Highway in Sandwich, we must now be willing to find a way to live with the minimal visual, sound, and aesthetic interruptions and disruptions associated with wind turbines. A community cannot say it supports renewable energy and then so overregulate it that it makes the actual production of green power impossible. If the members of the Commission truly believe in renewable energy, and as Executive Director Niedzwiecki was quoted as saying, we don't want to become an economic drag on these projects, then the DRI language should either be rejected or amended as suggested today. On behalf of the Executive Committee of the Cape and Vineyard Electric Cooperative, we thank you for considering our comments. Sincerely, Charles S. McLaughlin, Jr., President. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a little comment before we go on. You might want to look at the bottom of the second or third page, in which I think there's a typographical error. It's after they've dismantled after only 120 days of no operation. The third page at the very bottom.
Okay. He said, no, that is back.
All right. Any other? Yes, Ryan.
If I could, Mr. Chair, I'd like to offer just a couple of points in response. The first being with respect to cost. The Commission currently has an amendment to our fee waiver before the Assembly, and within that we've included a cost structure for the potential review of wind turbine projects. Projects less than 250 kilowatts are subject to no fee through Commission review. Projects greater than that are subject to a $3,000 fee for Commission review, which is considerably less than our standard review, so we have offered some sensitivity to these projects and their economics and our fee structure. Additionally, the 1.5 times the tip height setback is the reference standard that the Massachusetts Renewable Energy Laboratory uses in their literature for siting wind in communities. So we pulled that as a direct reference from there. And in the decommissioning waiver, as you pointed out, there is a clause for some flexibility that unless a written waiver is obtained for good cause from the Cape Cod Commission Executive Director. So there's flexibility there for the decommissioning standard. Just a couple of points of reference.
Thank you.
Yeah, Ryan addressed a few points, there were a number of points raised, but in that CBEC letter, I'm not going to take 15 minutes right now to go and respond to that, but I will, on behalf of the Commission, respond point by point because I find aspects of that letter to be so shockingly inaccurate. So we will respond for you regardless of the outcome of any potential action that the Commission takes today.
Thank you. Are there any other federal, state, municipal?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Richard Elrick, resident of Mashpee, but I also serve as the energy coordinator for the town of Barnstable and the town of Bourne. I am not going to go into great detail over the substantive specifics. The feedback letter, I think, fairly accurately represents my point of view on this issue, that's for sure. I did want to just address a couple of process things in particular. I think that the process itself, in terms of determining the proper regulations, is backwards of the way it should have proceeded. I think probably the most effective way for you to have proceeded would have done a spatial planning exercise to begin with, so that the towns and yourselves could know the best locations on the Cape for appropriately sized turbines. The process that you went through creates the standard before you have any sense of whether or not the standards that you create will in fact allow the development of wind turbines on the Cape. As I mentioned, or as I have mentioned to some of you previously, Barnstable did do a GIS survey of its town, and based on that 3,000-foot standard setback for 1 megawatt turbines, there would be no location in Barnstable suitable for a turbine of that size. You have made some marginal improvements, certainly in the language that's been presented. But, for example, in the noise minimum performance standard, you have a bizarre anomaly where, because you use a setback of 1.5 times the height of the turbine for 660 size turbines, you have a required setback of approximately 293 feet. Yet for a 750 kW turbine, your setback requirement is 1,600 feet. There's no logical or rational reason to explain that kind of disparity. So, again, I think what has happened here is, under political pressure, you have moved as quickly as you can to proceed with new regulations. I think that they've been prepared in so fast a fashion that the quality of the product is not what such an important issue as renewable energy for Cape Cod requires. A couple of other points that have been somewhat addressed. The cost issue is certainly going to be significant. It's good to hear that there'll be a waiver for projects of smaller size, but for many of these municipal projects, a $3,000 application fee, and for some of the smaller mid-sized projects, that could be problematic. Ultimately, again, as I said before, we are supposed to be, and we have talked about being, in support of renewable energy and to develop policies and procedures that enhance that for the towns. This goes in the complete opposite direction. As Paul Neswicki said, these, particularly the flicker standard, are the most stringent standards on the planet. If we're to prepare appropriate and reasonable regulations, I don't think it makes sense that you would aim for the most stringent regulations. It would seem to be more reasonable, more rational, that you find the perfect medium. And I don't think you put the work into it. Certainly I know from my experience as a former elected official, a consultant, and an advocate for wind, that requiring projects of 65 feet or more to come to the Cape Cod Commission is going to have a stultifying impact on the willingness of anybody to come forward with a new project. So if the goal is renewable energy, this takes us in the exact opposite direction. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Any other state, federal?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Michael.
Mr. Ellick, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Ellick, I just wanted you to clarify for me, because you came during the municipal officials part of the program, are you the opinions you're giving, are they part of in your capacity as a municipal consultant, or this is in your capacity as a Mashpee resident? How are you
I'm
making these
speaking
comments?
today in my capacity as the energy coordinator for the town. I'm not speaking on behalf of the selectmen or the town administration. They, as far as I know, have not offered their opinions one way or another. But as an advocate, certainly as the energy coordinator for both towns, I'm offering my opinion.
Thank you. Are there any other officials here? See any?
Yeah, I don't want to go tit for tat with everybody that gets out there, but some of these issues are starting to be redundant. And the issue of renewables, and somehow the commission being against renewables because they've got wind standards is that's a little shocking in and of itself. I mean, we have a regional policy plan that says any new commercial development has to produce 10% of its energy on site. We've already put 3 projects through that successfully, none of whom have used wind as a potential option. I mean, it starts to get beyond the pale when you suggest, because you have an issue with a particular technology that you think needs some reasonable regulation, that you are somehow against renewables altogether. And as it relates to the GIS study in the town of Barnstable, I think that's misinformation too. Every town has its own limitations. Barnstable has a municipal airport that significantly restricts where it can put any turbines. So to suggest the setback alone precludes turbine construction in any particular town. I mean, the reasonable alternative would be that to set a standard and say, well, if you have a lot of other restrictions and reasons why you can't put up wind turbines, we'll have a smaller setback. And just this constant drone of the fear and loathing of the Cape Cod Commission, how it's going to drag all these projects down. I think all the members here, certainly over the last 3 years, have experienced quite the opposite. So I think that's an old and unfounded fear. And in fact, part of the reason why we engage in this discussion is because I believe if we have common sense, uniform strategies for citing these things, we can cite them in better locations appropriately, more easily than we can do right now. So this is an emerging theme, but we will certainly respond to those with facts on your behalf.
Thank you. Are there any other comments from federal, state, or local officials? Moving on, we will ask for comments of the general public. I have a sign-up list, and I'll call names. And we're not going to put any time limit on each one's time to speak. But many of you have spoken before, and I think we remember some of the things that you have said. But if you could be to the point, it would be appreciated. And first of all, we'll have William Griswold from Centerville.
My name is William Griswold, and I live in Centerville, and I have two short technical points. The Commission proposes reducing the limit on shadow flicker from 30 hours to 10 hours per year. Rather than focus on how many hours of shadow flicker are acceptable, it would be better to focus on how few hours are needed. Shadow flicker only occurs when the sun is low on the horizon. At this latitude, there are about 80 hours of potential shadow flicker per year. A full year has 8,760 hours. Thus, the number of hours when shadow flicker is anticipated is less than 1% of the year. The solution, quite simply, is to shut down the wind turbine during those 80 hours. Then you have no shadow flicker at all. Magical discovery. This is what Country Garden does in Hyannis. They shut it down for 1% of a year, and they get away from shadow flicker. There are computer programs available that know when the sun rises and sun sets, and they do this automatically. The second topic is direct drive. Most major manufacturers now offer wind turbines with direct drive. This means that the wind turbine does not have a gearbox. Since the gearbox is where much of the noise is generated, a direct drive wind turbine can be several orders of magnitude quieter than a wind turbine which has a gearbox. The Northwind 100 wind turbine at Country Garden in Hyannis is a direct drive wind turbine. You can approach the base of the tower to within 200 feet before you can hear any sound coming from the wind turbine itself. For all future installations, the Commission should require that much quieter direct drive wind turbines be evaluated for each site. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. John Ford from Falmouth.
Good afternoon. Thank you for this opportunity to address you. I'll be very brief. I can't remember. My name is John Ford, and I live at 372 Blacksmith Shop Road in Falmouth. And I can't remember the last time I had a good night's sleep. I'd like to address the proposed threshold for noise. That's my major problem. I live 3,485 feet from Wind 1 in Falmouth. I live 4,065 feet from Wind 2. And currently I'm not bothered by that at all because it's not in operation. But I also live 2,745 feet from the Webb Notice wind turbine. I don't have a wind burn. I don't have a sunburn. My blood pressure is off the charts. My sleep is disturbed 4, 5, sometimes 6 times a week. I really can't remember the last time I had a good night's sleep. I have headaches and I have earaches. You have some definitions in the draft, and it talked about minimal impacts. Projected sound levels, including both ambient and infrasound, would result in minimal impacts. And I don't see that as defined in the draft. And I would like to have you focus on just what is a minimal impact. These have tremendous adverse impacts on me, and I think your flicker regulations are on the right track. I am geographically situated in a way that I am not impacted by flicker. My problem is noise, and I'd like you to do some more work on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Bergeron, you've already spoken. Richard Cola from East Falmouth.
My name is Dick Taylor. I'm from East Falmouth, and as you probably guess, I'm sort of for wind turbines, but I'm appalled about how unhappy all those people surrounding them are. My first comment is on the 10 times the rotor diameter. For an 82-meter diameter wind turbine, that corresponds to about a half a mile radius, or that would be a 1 mile diameter circle around each wind turbine. And if you could find any such spots, maybe you could point them out. Maybe you could actually go the other way, as a previous gentleman said, find the good spots and find out how narrow you can make, how close you can get to it without causing damage to the neighbors. A question about making noise, you might, so instead of being a restriction, you could be a help to find out where the good spots are. The other is noise making. Maybe you could mask this noise with wind chimes or some kind of artwork that flutters in the wind and makes a noise and masks the noise of the wind turbine itself. Or you use loudspeakers and generate any sound you want. You could even track the noise being made by the wind turbine and go up and down in opposition to what the wind turbine does, so it comes out at a constant level. For light flicker, I like the idea of shutting them down, but you'd think, since you have to be between you and the wind turbine and the sun have to line up, a tree in the way might help a lot there, especially if it was evergreen. And as far as the wind turbines for home use, the sort of rule of thumb is the bottom of the wind turbine blade should be 30 feet above the trees. So let's say you have a 10 kilowatt wind turbines about 20 feet across. You need 30 to 60 feet for the trees, say 60 feet, plus 30 feet for how much you need it on, that's 90 feet. And then the radius of a 20-foot wind turbine brings you, the hub would be at 100 feet, just to make it work. If you make it too close to the trees, it won't work. Falmouth Academy put one up like that, and it doesn't work.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Linda Solomon from Howard.
Hello, I'm Linda Solomon from Harwich. I just have a few points on the MPSE 1.7. I was wondering why the recreation areas and the roads were deleted from this. On the noise section, I'm not sure about this, but I think that the noise study should be based on a standardized test
that can measure accurately infrasound. I'm not sure if there is a standardized test made yet, but perhaps we ought to wait for them to make a standardized test before we even start building these things. Also, I think that tolerance levels to infrasound in both humans and wildlife should be established before any sound studies can be made, because I'm worried that you're going to be basing these sound studies on just the decibel level, and that's really not measuring the problem. As far as the shadow flicker, I was going to suggest 10 hours per year and 10 minutes per day, but I really like Mr. Griswold's idea of just shutting them down completely during that time. Thank you.
Thank you. Barbara Howard from Howard.
Good afternoon. I'm Barbara Howard. I live in Harwich. 13 Windy Green Lane, actually. The things I would like to point out are things that have not been mentioned over time. And I realize that you're dealing with other problems and other people can address those far more eloquently than I. But there are some things that have not been brought up that I think ought to be mentioned. For instance, I'll have to read them for you. An important component of turbines and most of the other electronics are rare earth elements. The wind turbine requires up to 4,000 pounds each of these precious metals. Not only do they strip mine them, but they are mined in China alone. 97% of the rare earth elements are mined in China. Another cost that has not been brought up too much is the elements inside of the turbines require electricity for operation from the grid. And plus, not only is that electrical cost, there are costs with the the rotating on and off portion of the electrical plants that have to subsidize when they don't run. And I want to read something for you. Campbell Dunford, director of the Renewable Energy Foundation, says that Germany, which has the largest number of wind turbines in Europe, is building 5 new coal power stations. 5 new coal power stations, which it does not otherwise need, purely to provide covering power for the fluctuations from their wind farms. I am not sure wind has been a great success for them, Mr. Dunford claims. Germany's CO2 emissions have actually risen since the increased use of wind power. And though the wind itself may be free, the cost of backup capacity is likely to be astronomical. These are not free. And I think Spain and a few other countries have mentioned that their CO2 footprint has increased with the use of wind turbines. And this is the same sort of research. I won't go into it now. In Colorado and Texas, these same things have been shown. But I'd like to recommend some of the setbacks that they're using in Europe. 1.5 kilometers, the French Academy of Medicine. 1.5 kilometers, UK Noise Association. 2 kilometers, Dr. Nina Pierpoint in the US. 1.6 kilometers, Dr. Amanda Harry, UK. 1.5 kilometers, Dr. Chris Hanning, UK. 1.5 kilometers, Acoustic Ecology Institute of USA. 2 kilometers, Frey and Haddon of UK. These are people who've had a lot of experience with wind turbines. They've had them for a lot of years, and they have a lot of experience that perhaps we should listen to. Thank you.
Thank you. James Rogers from Sandwich.
Yeah, briefly, John Ford already made my point on minimal impact and sound. I'd like to commend the commission for its hard work and serious effort, both the commission and the staff. I hope you'll all vote to pass these minimal standards. Thank you.
Thank you. Beatrice Holden for West Dennis.
Patricia Holden from West Dennis.
Sorry.
I live in West Dennis, but I have been on Blacksmith Shop Road and experienced the sound of the large wind turbines there, and I just don't want to see millions being spent to build all these big towers, and to have the people who are for the towers find out that, they do affect the health of the people who live near them. I think that most of the proponents that I have spoken to have not experienced the problems that these are causing in the neighborhood. And it would be, it's just a big waste to go ahead and spend all this money for things that are going to have to be taken down because they can't operate because they're creating health problems. I don't think that saving some energy, the woman who spoke before me just said that they're not as efficient as we would hope. And if they're not that efficient and they're causing health problems on the Cape, is that what we want? Thank you.
Thank you very much. David Young from Brewster.
My name is David Young from Brewster, Mass., and I'll be quick. I want to applaud the Commission for all the work you've done on the proposed amendments. I support the amendments as an absolute minimum. I feel there should be no exemptions to any town or developer. It is my opinion that these amendments bring us just a little closer to a no-harm stance. I asked the selectmen, town administrator, and the planning board of Brewster what their number was, meaning what's an acceptable number of citizens to be affected with diminished health or property values, and I just want to say my number is 0. Thank you.
Thank you. Eric Bidlow for Wellfleet.
Hi, I also would like to commend all of the members of the Commission and the Joint Committee for all their hard work. I imagine you must be more than weary of this subject by now. I know that I am, and I'm sure you're tired of reading emails on the subject. I just wanted to touch on a couple of quick points. I want to read a brief statement from Save Our Seashore. We've had a lot of debate here about a number of topics, and I just don't want to lose sight of the overall principles, but one of them was risk. The selectman from Dennis talked about infrasound and how there's a lot that we don't know. There's a high degree of suspicion that it may be one of the many components of wind turbine noise that are highly objectionable and that may be interacting on human physiology to produce these terrible symptoms. But there's a lot more that we need to know. It's also studied, by the way, in the field of acoustic noise, and there certainly are instances where the U.S., for example, has explored using it as a weapon, so I don't think we can say that it's benign. But I think that the proper way to look at that is to say that I think that any developer that wants to raise a 400-foot tower that's going to broadcast noise and flicker over a vast area prove the absence of harm. And I've spoken about this before, but this issue of risk belongs to the developer. He can't erect a giant industrial structure that might punish people the way it has punished people in Falmouth and say, well, we don't know for sure, so let's do it. I think that's grossly irresponsible. Another issue that I think is completely backwards that we've heard a lot about in the comments from CVEC continually, most notably, but from other people, there are certain effects that are acknowledged that are extremely troublesome, that have the effect of depriving people of the use of their property, both public and private. One of those is flicker. Another one is noise. And a third one, to which I think members of the Cape Cod Commission should certainly be sensitive, is scenic vistas or historic preservation. Now, some of those things belong to the public, and some of those things belong to private property owners. But I don't find anywhere in our hundreds of years of legal tradition, in zoning laws, property rights, I don't find any clause in there that says that a developer should propose to stand before you and argue that making people sick and depriving them of sleep is a mere annoyance and that he should be allowed to do it. I think that these debates about how many hours of flicker are industry standard are completely misguided. I agree with the people that have spoken today that say there's a simple solution to that problem. The tolerance should be 0. If I walk out of my backyard and the flicker is striking me, and by the way, all these flicker studies always look at a window. They look at a pinpoint or something, and light bounces all over the place. So if that hits 30 feet outside my window and I look out the window, I can't stand it. So if I'm in my backyard and this flicker is occurring all around me, I'm the receptor. Now, I just don't understand how any developer has the right to stand before you and dictate to you how many hours per day or year or minutes or whatever he should be allowed to do that to you. Okay, so I think these are all important things. We've heard a lot about science. The science is evolving. The proponents habitually claim that anybody who opposes their projects is superstitious, or they just found some garbage on the internet, that they're carried away, those sorts of things, and they claim to have the science on their side. I'd like to see it. If the science in favor of these projects and proving the absence of harm is so compelling, why don't you show it to us? All you have to do to get your permit is to bring this vast science you say you have at your disposal and prove the absence of harm for your project. It's that simple. That's your burden, not mine. Another one is financial accountability. This whole issue of decommissioning. These projects could go bust in year 1 or year 2. There's a lot of ways these things could go wrong. There can be lawsuits. There could be, right now, there's an action to enforce a cease and desist order in Falmouth. You cannot be satisfied with a decommissioning mandate that requires a sinking fund over 20 years so that in 20 years from now, lo and behold, they'll have the money. That's not responsible. That financial accountability belongs to the developer. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know whether that developer might go bankrupt. And in Bourne, for example, as in a lot of other places, we have these special purpose corporations that are either corporations or LLCs. They don't have any other assets. If they go bankrupt, there's no one to pursue. That's why they did it. So let's be real here. The decommissioning has to belong to the developer. If his project doesn't make sense, if he has to buy that bond, so be it. So I wanted to address those points. Let me read this brief statement. We believe that the evidence is clear that large-scale industrial wind energy projects pose a very significant risk to inhabitants, to wildlife, and to the environment and character of Cape Cod. We believe that Cape Cod is an inappropriate location for large industrial wind turbines of any description because the industrial machines are out of scale and out of character with their surroundings on Cape Cod, because they pose a risk to both residents and the environment, and because they are fundamentally incompatible with the other uses to which land on Cape Cod is already dedicated, including residential development, recreational use, natural conservation, and scenic and historic preservation. We believe that the proposed setback provisions in the minimum performance standards are too lenient and that there's no scientific support for the idea that a setback provision of 3,000 feet or less is sufficient to prevent harm to residents in such a densely populated area. To the contrary, we believe there is considerable evidence that a setback provision of 1.25 miles may not always be adequate to prevent significant harm. In view of the magnitude of the risk, we believe it would be more appropriate for any applicant under the DRI process who proposes to operate such an industrial facility to adopt the burden of proof in demonstrating that his project is benign and that it should be allowed to operate within 1.25 miles from any residence. If it is so plain to the wind energy proponents that a smaller setback is warranted, why not invite them to prove it to the satisfaction of the Commission? We believe that the Commission should reject the repeated assertions of the wind energy proponents that they should be allowed to subject other property owners, their neighbors, or their host communities to any form of disturbance or impairment of the use of their property or the exercise of their legitimate rights and privileges. We do not believe that the operator of any industrial wind energy project, or any project for that matter, has any preemptive rights that supersede the rights of existing property owners or other stakeholders in the community. We are not moved by the arguments of the proponents that such violations of the legitimate rights to the use and enjoyment of public and private property should be tolerated and officially sanctioned because they are, quote, standard practice, unquote, in the industry, as they claim. Nor do we believe that the proponents have any basis to justify their opinion of what constitutes an, quote, acceptable or, quote, minimal degree of pain, disturbance, or impairment. We find no basis for these positions in existing law, in any zoning regulations, or in the charter of the Cape Cod Commission. We believe they are indefensible, illegitimate, and ultimately, when these positions effectively sanction the abandonment and the outright sacrifice of other members of the community, decidedly unethical and immoral. Regardless of whether the Cape Cod Commission votes to accept the proposed minimum performance standards, we hope that the Commission will explicitly recognize all of the following fundamental facts. 1, that there are existing property owners and other stakeholders whose public and private property rights and interests are legitimate, appropriate, and protected by law. 2, that wind developers do not possess any preemptive rights of any kind that supersede the rights of existing stakeholders, that there is no foundation in any law for them to assert this claim, and that any such claims must be dismissed as illegitimate. 3, that there are ample, credible scientific evidence that documents the significant risk is important, risk to harm to residents, to the community, and to other stakeholders owing to the adverse impacts of industrial wind turbines. 4, that our understanding of the adverse impacts of industrial wind turbines is still evolving, and the Commission is therefore committed to engaging in continuous, periodic evaluation of the MPS and the accompanying technical bulletin in the light of relevant new information in order to ensure public safety, to avoid any adverse health consequences, and to avoid any impairment of the legitimate use of public or private property from the installation and operation of such facilities. If these principles above are affirmed and upheld by the Commission, if the technical bulletin that arises from this process is effective in forcing the developer to make an honest assessment of the relevant risk factors, and if the Cape Cod Commission is committed to a continual process of reevaluating over time the adequacy of both the MPS and the technical bulletin in the light of new scientific information to ensure their mutual effectiveness, then we are hopeful that we can offer our qualified support for such a regulatory regime as a significant improvement over the status quo. I'd just again like to say thank you. We're offering our qualified support I hope you will approve these minimum performance standards. We obviously have some reservations, but we believe that this process will be a very large improvement. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Kathy Sherman from Rooster, please.
Hi, I'm Kathy Sherman, and I live in Brewster, as you said. I wanted to make somewhat of rebuttal or corrections, clarifications of some things that were said the last time. I agree with Eric that this is a big improvement, and I do thank everybody for taking the time to hear all the testimony. But one of my concerns is the having the 660 limit, because the Swedish studies that were done were almost entirely the smaller 660 and under, and they found they're the ones that did the noise annoyance comparison. It may not be as drastic as what I said the last time, that it's 30 decibels more worse than air traffic noise, but it is at least 10 decibels worse than air traffic noise. And I also wanted to correct the Mass Clean Energy Center person who said that Dr. McCunning was an expert. He was on a misnamed expert panel sponsored by the wind industry, and he has misquoted the Swedish studies fairly badly. And the wind industry in general misquotes in terms of what annoyance means. Annoyance is just a standard way that for since the 50s, noises have been compared, or mitigation efforts have been evaluated. And there is a lot of evidence about the ill effects of noise, such that, for instance, New York City is putting restrictions on construction, and they renamed their environmental policy committee to be Noise Control Committee. So it's true that some of the people that were most annoyed were those that viewed their home as a place for restoration, and they felt that the wind turbine noise was an intrusion of privacy. But this went out for distance, actually, I think, past 3,000 feet. So that's another concern. The study in Vinalhaven found the noise out to 3,700 feet did not diminish. That's probably because the further away you get, you're dropping out the higher frequency broadband range. That's what diminishes at 6 decibels per doubling. But at the low frequencies, it's more like it's about like 0.1 for the lowest frequencies. And so what you end up with is isolated aversive noise. So it's both stress and the pattern characteristics of the noise, not even always the absolute loudness. Often isn't. Another thing that has been misquoted, and I'm not sure exactly why, but they like to quote the National Research Council that said that at a half mile, that was the limit of sound problems. The source for the National Research Council did not study that issue. They quoted a paper from the British Wind Energy Association, and that was from 2000, when I believe that all the turbines were smaller and that the setbacks were larger. I have some concerns about taking roadways, especially evacuation routes, out of a safety clear zone and recreation areas. The one person on that expert panel who dismissed the health effects was very worried about ice throw, but he felt it wouldn't be a problem because in Chatham, Kent, they had setbacks of almost 2,000 feet. So I think we need to make sure that matches up. And for sound studies, in a way, I almost think that if you got very accurate data on the sound source, and you had a program that was good about sound modeling, which I don't know that there is any, because I think they're all for ground sources of noise. But if you had that would include the infrasound, or at least pretty close to it. And but it's very important that the whatever the manufacturer data is matches the wind conditions that we have here on Cape Cod, because we have extremely high wind shear here. So that's why ambient noise is not going to cover it up. I have wind chimes, but I seriously doubt that it would drown that out, because what it means is that there's more aerodynamic noise. And so, for instance, in one town that had a study of wind shear, it would mean that as the blade was at the bottom, it would be going through 5 meters per second wind. At the top, it would be going through 10 meters per second, and on the ground, it would be less than half of the 5 meters. So very, very little wind, and I think that's something that varies. Maybe someday they'll have a program where they can shut it off when the wind shear is too high too. But there's a lot of unique characteristics that we have here on Cape that Hull, for whatever reason, does not have. They don't have abnormal wind shear. But Vestas reports their noise data from for normal shear of 0.16. About half of Falmouth, or half of Brewster's, half of Easton's, and I forget where else it's been done. But we saw in the paper yesterday that Falmouth may not even be in compliance, but that illustrates how difficult it is to monitor sound. And so I'm very concerned about that, but I think, if you took those factors into account, and if a developer knew that, for instance, maybe Massachusetts state law is going to have to be modified so that impact of noise at nighttime and in the evening to a short quietude, may make it so that they're not operating all the time, or they're not operating all the time in certain wind directions and that kind of thing. Maybe some of those things can go in the technical bulletin, I don't know, but I would like a more conservative threshold. And then I do have one thing.
Do we get to a close, please?
Yeah, I am coming to the close. I wanted to give you this because it is from the National Institute of Environmental Health, being concerned, and it's not a study either. There's a lot of white papers, but there's very few studies. But it is concerned about the long-term health risks from wind turbine noise, and it also gives a perspective on air pollution from transport as opposed to electrical production. That's sort of to bring the troops home.
Thank you very much. The next person on the list is James Liddell from Yarmouthport.
I don't quite know where to put this so it's visible to everybody, so I'll just put it back here.
And again,
my name is Jim Liddell. I'm a year-round resident of Cape Cod, retired professional engineer, and hold bachelor's and master's degree in mechanical engineering and business administration from Cornell University and Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, or RPI. My wife and I reside in Yarmouthport and have lived there since 1994. Have been very involved in analyzing wind turbine proposals and preparing and presenting factual, technical, economic, and other pertinent information concerning wind turbines on Cape Cod and the islands. I am also a member of the Town of Yarmouth Old Kings Highway Historic District Committee and was previously a member of the Town of Yarmouth Energy Committee. However, my comments today are not of those groups, the Old Kings Highway or the Energy Committee. They're strictly my own comments because I haven't talked to them about this specific things. I have two main points regarding their proposed regulations on land wind turbines that I would like to make. First, since as I understand it, a primary responsibility of the Cape Cod Commission includes protecting land on Cape Cod so that we can have good utilization, continued land, I believe that having regulations which use best science and logic to approve land wind turbines is one of the best actions you can take to significantly reduce the greenhouse gas, carbon dioxide, emissions created by burning fossil fuels to generate electricity. That is a predominant way. Nuclear has not had a plant built since 1983, and of course it has problems in disposing of waste, and we have to drive towards the problem instead of getting away from it. Here I have 3 photo simulations showing the current shoreline of Cape Cod, this one here, a 1-level rise in the shoreline, and a 5-meter rise. Now you can see the land of Cape Cod is quickly disappearing on those sketches or photo simulations. These simulations, based on the U.S. Geodetic Service land elevation lines, the technique was to color it blue if it was 1 meter or less, for the 1 meter rise, and so on to various levels, clearly illustrate that Cape Cod and Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket even more so will shrink considerably in the not-so-distant future if actions like your presently proposed unwarranted, in my opinion, restrictions remain in your new regulations. This is because practically all scientific studies have concluded that sea levels will rise 1 meter, unless there's a turnaround in global warming, in the next 50 to 100 years, and correspondingly more in future years. A 1 meter sea level rise will submerge almost 5% of Cape and Islands land, and a 5 meter rise will flood about 20%. And this is not that far off, 50 to 100 years. Of course, I'll be long gone, but you know, there's people that will be here, a lot of people, and our children and our children's children. Secondly, I want to explain and emphasize that wind turbine size and the average wind velocity, and thus the siting location and the height of the blades, have on the output of any particular model or manufacturer and size wind turbine. A major objective should be to locate wind turbines with the blades high enough above the ground to receive high velocity wind. Because for any given turbine's model and size, the turbine's electrical output is proportional to the cube of the wind velocity. For example, if the same exact turbine were in 2 different locations, and the first received wind averaging 10 miles an hour velocity, and the second is in a location or height, higher height, to receive 20 miles per hour, or twice as fast, the turbine located in the 20 mile per hour wind will produce 8 times as much electricity as the turbine located in 10 mile per hour wind. Because cubing, so it's 20 versus 10, that's 2. 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 is 8. So that's what happens there. The second major cost efficiency factor is the length of the propeller blades. The electrical output of a wind turbine is proportional to the square of the blade length, because the blades sweep the area of a full circle. And as we remember, back in high school or wherever, the area of a circle is proportional to the radius squared, or the diameter squared. Thus, if the blade length is doubled, the electrical output is 4 times as much. My point is that by disregarding these two investment, or perhaps partially disregarding, these two investment return financial factors in your proposed regulations will make them counterproductive or less productive. In closing, in addition to these charts, I have photo simulations of sea level rises up to 12 meters in 1 meter increments. And these are factual because it's, unless you don't trust the geodetic service. Well, it's a matter of taking those things and putting them in. And I would be glad to email that to the committee if you would want it. Thank you for considering my comments.
Thank you. And Mr. Rick Eldred from...
Oh, I'm not speaking, I just thought it was the same.
All right. Thank you. Sheila Bowen from Howard.
Good afternoon. I'm Sheila Bowen from Harwich. I'm also the president of Windwise Cape Cod and the Harwich Neighborhood Alliance. I'm only going to speak for a few moments. I'm not going to discuss the pros and cons of wind energy. I would like to say that as president of Windwise, I feel comfortable in saying that we would like to support the statement that was read by Mr. Bibler tonight. Our sympathies and our beliefs are very similar to his and those of Save Our Seashore. But I'm here specifically today to address the matter at hand, which is your guidelines. And I want to thank you very much for the time that you have spent in preparing these. I appreciate the fact that this wasn't done in a vacuum and that there are political considerations. And I just urge you to please accept and adopt the guidelines so that we can move forward and develop the technical bulletin. I will just like to express one concern, and that is the waiver for the municipal wind turbines. And my one concern is that I was at the meeting on Monday where it was expressed that the waiver was in keeping with the fact that a municipal turbine would not go forward without the support of the townspeople in that specific town. And you may remember when I spoke before you earlier this month, I made the point that the Cape Cod Commission was the perfect entity to be reviewing these projects because it really is a regional issue. Right now, it comes to mind there are 3 different projects where the turbines are sited within town lines, but they are actually going to affect people in a neighboring town, more likely in a greater way than the people within the town. There was one project that is currently in discussion, and people in Harwich were not even notified, and they live closer than the residents of that town. So there is that great concern. A town is not an island, I guess, to quote the poet. You are going to affect people who live in neighboring towns, and they will have no vote. They will have no say. So please consider that when you look at the waiver. But I want to thank you again for your time and for your deep concern for Cape Cod. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Liz Zago has already spoken. Rich Elric has already spoken. Lucinda Albrecht.
Yes, I think everything that I had wanted to say was covered by Eric Bibler. I especially thought that what he had said about the 1.24 miles, 2 kilometers is an international kind of agreed setback, and so I would really encourage you not to go lower than where your highest point would be.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for all your time.
You're welcome. Thank you. And John D. Simone.
Yeah, I'd like to
thank you for the time, but I think my points have been addressed. I'd like to pass my time on to the next person.
Is there anybody who did not have their name on the list who would like to speak briefly? Thank you very much. Tina LeBeau. And Henry DiGiacomo. Somebody must have said what they wanted to say when they left. Thank you. Are there any other folks that would like to say something? We'll move on. Does the commission, any members of the commission wish to make a comment or ask a question? Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Microphone, please. Oops, I'm sorry. During one of the comments, it was mentioned the difference in the noise study between a gearbox turbine and a direct drive turbine. And I guess my question would be this: has there been any thought to separate the two of them in the regulations as far as the study and the noise? Because if there is a difference between the two, then that would make a difference in the turbine in itself when it comes to certain things. So whoever can answer that question.
Staff member asking
that. Ryan Christenberry for the record. It's unclear to me whether the direct drive technology that was referenced appears in the 1 megawatt and greater turbines that are there. I think that's something we'd have to investigate. The gearbox noise is more typical of the smaller turbines, the 100 kW turbines, etc. The larger turbines carry with them a different set of sound implications, and whether it's this direct drive component that is the distinguishing factor is not clear to me.
Well, then that would offer the question then, with 100, if the 100 one is causing such chaos, might there be some sort of conversation toward that area, if that's the one that's causing the problems, the smaller one. And I understand we're trying to get the basics here and go forward, but I'm just wondering. I'm not, I'm an expert in anything like this, so that's why I'm asking that to whoever may be able to answer.
We hoped to get into those kinds of issues as we develop the technical bulletin, noise is noise, but I think what this can do is to begin to set sort of a quality control standard, and we're going to learn more about the emerging technologies, different makes and kinds of structures that are available. And I think that will that potential developers and applicants will react to that, and we'll wind up with better proposals.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from, yes, Julie?
Well, the thank yous are going around, and I appreciate your thank yous. We have worked very hard, and we've done a lot of listening. I just made some notes and some comments. I hope that all of you who are out there and who've come to all of our public hearings were aware of what the Cape Cod Commission did before the wind turbines hit the fans of the roadies, so to speak. We are a planning regulatory agency, and it's our job to review projects and to see how they will affect the future of your towns and the Cape as a whole. And I think we do our due diligence. We have lots of subcommittee meetings that hold public hearings in your towns on specific projects. We have our own subcommittee meetings where we go over what we've heard and what's being presented to us by our staff. We hire experts in the field so that we can study each project specifically as it comes before us, and we don't lump all of them together. From what I learned from the citizens of Falmouth, I think if the commission had reviewed the Falmouth project, it probably wouldn't have been built. I'm not certain, but my instinct tells me that. We're trying to avoid these types of the problems by having these minimum standards, and the word is minimum standard. Sometimes I read very quickly. I look at the paper and I go as fast as I can through it just to get an idea of what's in the paper. And I sometimes come up with the wrong idea or opinion. When I go back and I reread the articles and I look at the words the reporters have used, my concerns are assuaged. I see that I made a mistake. I hope that when all of this is over, you sit down when it's quiet and you read our proposed amendments. We have listened. We talk about mitigation. We talk about waivers for fees. These are things that we do for any project that comes before us for a review. We can do a thorough DRI review. And to some people, that makes us a regime, which we're not. We also do limited DRI reviews. So we're not going to be treating any wind turbine project any differently than we would any other project that comes before us, because we're responsible for the planning and the regulations to keep, I call it the sustainability of Cape Cod, sustainable. Let's see. I was once a selectman in my town, and I respect town autonomy. And I think it's incumbent upon towns, and I don't care if it's wind turbines, for zoning, or anything else, you have to have a vision for your town. You have to have your land vision map. And it's incumbent upon the people who are the policymakers in that town to make sure that their zoning boards of appeals, their planning boards, their long-range planning people are on the same wavelength as far as the vision, and that they take the time to write whatever is necessary to protect what the people of that town want.
Thank you very much. Any other commission members who wish to speak? Yes, Roger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As usual, I'm going to be a little bit different. One of the things about wind power that's kind of interesting, you might ask yourself, because we heard it at one of our hearings, where have all the quaint windmills on Cape Cod gone? It used to be covered with windmills. There are a couple of them left, one in Orleans, one in Joyce's Town, and they're about 30 feet high and a blade about 22 feet, and they rotated between 8 and 15 RPM. What happened to them? They weren't very efficient, were they? You're going to do the same thing by running down to the Stop and Shop and buying yourself the same thing in a bag instead of growing it and hauling it down to the mill and having it ground. Careful about wind. What happened to the loveliest of all wind-powered creations we ever had? The clipper ship. Has it ever occurred to you that the clipper ship didn't work, isn't still here now, simply because it is inefficient? And wind power is inefficient. No matter how you slice it, wind power is not an efficient use of our money. There are now, by the way, 17 nuclear plants under permit in the permitting process, so eventually we'll get them. And that's the way we ought to be going. Right now, less than 1% of our oil imports are going to electric power, so we're going to cut down on that. So you got to be careful there. The other one we have to be a little bit interested in is this question of cost. Power is produced in the United States by TVA, Barant, Duke Power, Southern Company, and a few others. And they sell their power to the grid. What's the grid? The grid is a wholesale organization that makes a regulated market in power. These people sell to the grid about 2.6 cents per kilowatt. The grid, in turn, wholesales the power to retailers such as NSTAR for about 3.8 to 4 cents a kilowatt. They sell it to you. When you get your bill, it runs about 8 cents a kilowatt. Now, the balance of your bill is in transmission and in other good little things that you may or may not like. But half your bill is for power and the rest of it is for transmission. Now, at 8 cents, if you were buying our power, if Cape Wind were supplying us entirely with the Cape, our power price would increase because they have been allowed a rate by the DPU of 19 cents per kilowatt plus a 2.5 cent spiff. true. And if that was the rate they're going to be putting power back into the grid, if that's which they sold you power for that amount, guess what would happen to your power bill? And now we'll move on to more substantive stuff. I'm surprised that a receptor is defined as a building. I thought that a receptor is with the ears on a human head. And I would much rather see our definition of receptor be a person or persons rather than a building. A building, a living, walking, breathing human being is affected by flicker and is affected by sound. A building isn't. So we ought to change our definition to put the word human being in this matter of receptors. The other thing is, it was clear in our meetings that there was some misunderstanding of both optics and celestial mechanics as to when and how flicker occurs. Flicker occurs at buildings that are north of the turbines, buildings that are within an arc of about 123 degrees east and west of the unit itself. Flicker occurs twice a year as the sun rises above the horizon and as it sinks again in the wintertime. In effect, to measure flicker by hours is wrong. It should be limited to the amount you can tolerate in one day. And I say that's zero. The flicker is not something that we should have to give up our pleasant living for. However, the requirement of 10 hours is foolish. It should be limited to an amount per day, and that should be limited to whatever you figure you can stand in your garden. But this present limit is wrong. I'm not sure that the noise thing needs to be treated any further. We've heard a lot of it. But here I'm talking to our commissioners. You and I swore an oath when we signed on for this commission, and I'm older than any of you by a jugful. I qualify as a fogey. But in my day, an oath entailed real responsibility and obligation. Apparently, many of us today, it doesn't mean that much. We all swore to obey the law, and the law establishing the Cape Cod Commission require us to protect and preserve and enhance Cape Cod. You may rationalize in any way you see fit. You may justify to your heart's content. But by voting for these minimum standards, you are voting to hurt people. Not whether you should hurt people, for it is a given in this standard that you're going to hurt people, that you will hurt people. These standards assure that the human receptor will be hurt. And in hurting people, you are doing so in order that some other people can make money. And to my mind, that flies in the face of the oath I took to protect the land and the people of Cape Cod. I therefore recommend that these standards be remanded to committee for amendment and corrections that are necessary to protect the people of Cape Cod. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Peter?
How could I not? It's been a great hearing, it really has. I think, I can't really agree with Roger on this particular point. I respect his position as a colleague, but I think what these recommendations do, and statutes do, is protect the residents of Cape Cod. Now, we have built into the proposed technical bulletin safety and mitigation for noise and shadow flicker to address Roger's concerns, I believe. And I think we've cobbled together a pretty robust, with a lot of input from the community, some pretty tough regulations while not restricting. So in my mind, I think it doesn't need to be remanded back to the committee. I think I'm prepared to make a motion after further comment, so thank you.
Are there any other commissioners? Yes, Elizabeth.
I just have a few questions and a clarification. On decommissioning, 120 days isn't much time at all if somebody has to go through the planning board or ZBA or whatever. is that waiver for an extension going to be something you can get easily, or should we lengthen the time to 6 to 9 months or something? 4 months is not much long time to deal with the town.
The standard allows for extension of that waiver for reasonable cause on signature of the executive director.
So it will be easy to get.
Yeah, it's akin to a minor modification one.
Okay, my other question is on the municipal waiver. Now, you're still requiring the town to come to the commission.
Yes.
You're just waiving certain sections, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so towns aren't getting a pass on municipal turbines at all?
There's a difference between a waiver and an exemption. I think Mr. Bergeron pointed out earlier. An exemption would be a standard which the local municipality could interpret for itself as to whether a project would trigger commission review or not. A waiver requires the municipality to come in and show us the plan. So, there was a lot of thought put into that, whether it would be an exemption or a waiver. Given the number of municipal proposals that we've seen and the relative success or lack of success, we thought that we had something to add at the beginning of the process, and that it would not be in any way overly burdensome, given all the other requirements of moving forward with these kind of projects, to come to the commission first and allow us to make some comments about its potential regional impact.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments? Yes, Joy?
There was a question about decommissioning and the security. Would you explain it the way you're talking about it at our meetings, that the security upfront, and so that we know that it's there, and if they go bankrupt, the money's still there?
Well, the basic thought process the committee discussed on decommissioning was to make sure that there was a viable corporate entity that would be responsible should these structures need to be decommissioned. And it's structured that way. It anticipates that where there's a municipal application and a town as a partner, that that kind of security would not be required, because the full faith and credit of the town obviously will stand behind that project, and the town is certainly the kind of corporate body that we would prefer, because it will be there forever. So that's the distinction in nature.
And security, explain the security.
Harry, is there any other... did you have something more you want to say? Run a little time.
Would you use the microphone, please?
I would like Mr. Nitwicki to explain the security.
Well, the security is a more general term than a particular bond, but the concept is that there would have to be money put aside up front, so that if the project for any reason failed or became defunct, that there would be available funds to take the structures down.
Before we're going to proceed just a minute, but I just wanted to say one thing that's important to me about this, taking this kind of an action, will put us in a position where we will have control over our own destiny, so to speak, and some of the governmental agency or committee or whatever won't come in and put upon us what we don't want. And I think the Commission is facing up to its responsibility to make sure that we are upholding the oath that we took. And I just wanted to make that clear. We've had a little experience where we didn't have anything in place, and we, in certain instances, got exactly what we didn't want. So I would ask anybody else if there's anything to say. Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, just one quick thing. On the review process, this is the minimum sentence that we've come up with. What is the procedure for a review process? 1 year, 2 years, whatever, that you can make amendments or whatever else. What is that process going to be for the future? Because this is the basis of the start. So what would that be?
There's no official process that they did, but I would agree with you. Clearly, the way that information is changing, technology is changing, this is something we're going to have to stay on top of. What it would require is that we are 2.5 years into our 5-year regional policy plan cycle. That RFP will have to be updated in 2.5 years. This will be part of that update.
Thank you.
Did we have a motion?
Yeah, we have something happening here. Here.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would move to close the hearing and the record.
Second.
We moved and seconded to close the hearing on the record. Is there any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? No. Any abstentions? It's unanimous. Is there another motion?
Yes. I move to approve the proposed amendment to the intersection of the regional policy plan and forward the amendments to the Assembly of Delegates for adoption and incorporation into the regional policy plan.
Is there a second?
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? All in favor will signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed?
No.
Is there one no?
It's probably 3 no's, but I was being tried nice and loud. And I know I'm tapping on the deck of a troop hammer with a tack hammer to stop the engine. But I still feel it's the wrong thing to do.
Okay, thank you. All right, it was unanimous vote. And I think there has to be another motion for the... It was not. How do you call it unanimous? Well, it was one against, but it changed. I voted no. One against. Thank you. Another motion, Peter.
I move to approve the proposed thresholds as amended, as an amendment to Chapter A, DRI Enabling Regulations, and forward the amendment to the Assembly of Delegates for adoption.
Second.
Moved and seconded to approve the enabling regulations as amended and at the chapter of ADRI and forwarding the amendments to the Assembly of Delegates for adoption. All right. Any further discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? No. Any abstentions? This passed, not unanimously, but with one negative vote. I think that at this time, I think we need to say thank you to the staff and to the amount of work they put into it. I think we all learned things that we never expected that we would need to learn. And the material was presented in a way that would help common everyday people like ourselves to understand what's going on. And the process is only beginning, and I think that we need to give the staff a real round of applause. Would you want to get over
Put 2 hands together.
Put 2 hands together, just like, yeah. Put them up and say, yes.
My name is Stan Kaczynski. I live in Yarmouthport.
Let me turn that off.
What is your name, please?
My name is Stan Kaczynski. I live in Yarmouthport. I would like to think that all members of this commission would assume an open mind about both the pros and cons of this proposal and not beforehand decide one way or another like one or two of you appear to be behaving. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I don't agree with you, so you don't go wrong.
Is there anything else to come before the commission today? Yes.
Just thank you for your thanks to staff. I want to thank the joint committee and staff. There's a lot of work on this, especially the legal and planning staff. But I do want to recognize Ryan Christenberry, who suffered the slings and arrows through this process and has piled through and processed hundreds, if not thousands, of pieces of paper and testimony, and she's done an outstanding job. And it's always great to work with people that are much more talented than yourself. So, thank you.
somebody like to move to adjourn? So moved. Second? All in favor? Sorry. Hold on, please. Hold on, I'm looking quickly. Are there any comments from any members of the commission?
No,
I don't see it. Thank you. Good. Keep us on our toes. All right, all in favor, signify by saying aye again. All opposed? We are adjourned. You're free to leave.